On the morning of December 26, 1996, a 6-year-old girl was reported missing from her home in Boulder, Colorado. Her name was JonBenét Ramsey. She was beautiful, she was talented. She had been on pageant stages since she was 4 years old, wearing crowns and gowns and a smile that could fill a room. Her mother adored her. Her father adored her. By every account, she was a little girl who was deeply loved. By that same evening, she was found dead in the basement of her own home. She had been strangled. She had been struck on the head with enough force to cause a massive skull fracture. And she had been found not by police, not by detectives, not by a search team, but by her own father, who carried her body upstairs and laid her on the living room floor in front of the investigators who had been inside that house all day. All day. In a house where a 6-year-old girl was lying dead in the basement, and nobody had found her. What followed the death of JonBenét Ramsey became one of the most covered, most debated, most dissected criminal cases in the history of the United States. A case that consumed the attention of an entire nation for years. A case that destroyed reputations, tore a family apart, and produced one of the most bizarre pieces of evidence in the history of American crime. Nearly 30 years later, not a single person has ever been charged with her murder. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. And it is one of the most haunting cases this channel will ever cover. John Ramsey was a successful businessman. He had built a computer services company called Access Graphics that had recently reached $1 billion in annual sales. He was wealthy, respected, and well-connected in Boulder, Colorado. His wife, Patsy Ramsey, was a former Miss West Virginia. She was vivacious, warm, deeply devoted to her family, and passionate about the pageant world that had defined her own youth. When her daughter, JonBenét, showed an early interest in performing and competing, Patsy channeled everything she had into supporting that passion. JonBenét had an older brother, Burke, who was 9 years old in December of 1996. The family lived in a large Tudor-style house in one of Boulder's most affluent neighborhoods. By all external appearances, they were a picture of American success. Beautiful home, beautiful family, beautiful life. On the evening of December 25th, 1996, the Ramseys attended a Christmas party at the home of friends. They returned home late. John and Patsy carried their sleeping children inside, tucked them into bed, and went to sleep themselves. At approximately 5:52 in the morning on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey came downstairs and found a 3-page handwritten ransom note on the staircase. What she did next, and what happened in the hours that followed, would become the foundation of one of the most controversial criminal investigations in American history. The ransom note was unlike anything investigators had seen before. It was 3 pages long, handwritten. It demanded $118,000 for the safe return of JonBenét. It claimed to be from a small foreign faction. It warned John Ramsey not to contact the police, not to involve the FBI, and to be ready to receive a phone call between 8 and 10 in the morning. The amount demanded, $118,000, was peculiar. It was not a round number. It was not the kind of figure a kidnapper typically demands. It was, investigators would later note, almost exactly the amount of John Ramsey's annual bonus that year. Patsy Ramsey called 911 immediately upon finding the note, directly contradicting the instructions it contained. Police arrived at the house within minutes. And here is where the investigation began to go wrong in ways that would permanently compromise the case. In 1996, Boulder, Colorado was not a city with a homicide division experienced in handling major crimes. The officers who arrived that morning treated the situation as a kidnapping rather than a crime scene. Friends and family members were invited into the house throughout the morning to support the Ramseys while they waited for the promised phone call. People moved through the house. People touched things. Potential evidence was compromised before investigators fully understood what they were dealing with. The phone call from the kidnapper never came. At approximately 1 in the afternoon, a detective asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house for anything that seemed unusual or out of place. John Ramsey went to the basement. The basement of the Ramsey house had several rooms. John Ramsey went to a room that had been used for storage and wine. The door had a wooden latch on the outside. He opened it. His daughter was inside. JonBenét was lying on the floor. She was wearing a white long-sleeved shirt and white pants. Her wrists were bound above her head with a cord. There was a piece of duct tape over her mouth. Around her neck was a thin cord that had been tightened with a wooden handle, a device investigators would identify as a garrote. John Ramsey removed the tape from her mouth. He picked her up and carried her upstairs. He placed her on the living room floor. The crime scene in that basement room had now been irreversibly disturbed. The medical examiner later determined that JonBenét had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. She had also sustained a skull fracture to the right side of her head so severe that it had caused an 8.5-inch crack in her skull. Either injury could have been fatal. She had been struck on the head and strangled. The time of death was estimated to be between 10 p.m. on December 25th and 2 a.m. on December 26th. She had been killed while her parents slept upstairs, inside her own home. What followed the discovery of JonBenét's body was a media firestorm, the likes of which had not been seen in American crime coverage since the O.J. Simpson trial just a year earlier. JonBenét's pageant photographs and competition videos were broadcast on every television network in the country. A 6-year-old girl in full makeup, elaborate costumes, performing for judges. The footage was striking and unusual to people who had no exposure to the child pageant world, and it colored the public perception of the case from the very beginning in ways that were not always fair to the victim or her family. The investigation focused almost immediately on John and Patsy Ramsey. This is not unusual in homicide investigations. Statistically, when a child is killed, the perpetrator is most often someone within the family or immediate circle. Investigators follow the evidence and the statistics. But the way the Ramseys were treated publicly, before any charges were filed, before any conclusive evidence was established, became one of the most controversial aspects of this entire case. The Boulder Police Department, under enormous media pressure, appeared to focus almost exclusively on the Ramseys as suspects, while other possibilities went underexplored. Patsy Ramsey in particular became the target of public suspicion, driven largely by questions about the ransom note. Handwriting analysts examined the note and compared it to samples from both John and Patsy Ramsey. The analysts were divided. Some believed the handwriting showed similarities to Patsy's. Others disagreed. No analyst was willing to state definitively that Patsy had written it. No analyst was willing to state definitively that she had not. The ransom note itself remains one of the most analyzed documents in the history of American crime. At 3 pages, it is extraordinarily long for a ransom note. Most ransom notes are brief and direct. This one was elaborate, almost theatrical. It contained phrases and language that struck investigators as odd, almost as if the writer had composed it with an awareness of how ransom notes are supposed to sound, drawn perhaps from movies or television rather than from actual criminal experience. Linguistic analysts spent years examining the note. They identified certain phrases, certain grammatical constructions, certain word choices that they believed pointed toward a specific type of writer. The note referenced a victory for your country in a way that seemed personal rather than generically threatening. It referred to John Ramsey as a fat cat, a phrase that felt emotionally charged. The note had been written with a pen and notepad found inside the Ramsey house. The kidnapper, if there was one, had come into that house, found writing materials, and composed a 3-page letter before or after committing the crime. That detail is profoundly strange. A person entering a home to kidnap a child for ransom does not typically stop to find a pen and write 3 pages of notes. They bring their materials with them. They are in and out as fast as possible. Unless the note was written by someone who was already inside the house and had access to its materials because they lived there, or unless the note was written to mislead investigators from the very beginning. There was physical evidence found at the scene that pointed away from the Ramseys and toward an intruder. A partial palm print was found on the door to the basement room where JonBenét was found. It took investigators years to identify it. In 2008, it was matched to a contractor named John Mark Carr. Wait, that is incorrect. Let me be precise because precision matters in a case like this. The palm print was eventually identified as belonging to an individual who had done work on the Ramsey house. But the broader DNA evidence is what changed this case most significantly. DNA was collected from JonBenét's clothing, specifically from her underwear, at the time of the original investigation. It was a small but meaningful sample of male DNA. It did not match John Ramsey, it did not match Burke Ramsey. It did not match any member of the Ramsey family. It was unidentified male DNA found on the body of a murdered 6-year-old girl. That DNA has been in the national database for decades. It has never been matched to anyone. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office used that DNA evidence to formally clear the Ramsey family of suspicion, stating that the DNA pointed to an unknown individual and that the family should no longer be considered suspects. John Ramsey was alive to receive that news. Patsy Ramsey was not. She had died of ovarian cancer in 2006, 10 years after her daughter's murder, without ever being charged, without ever being cleared, and without ever seeing justice for JonBenét. The list of other suspects and theories in this case is long, and the details of several are genuinely compelling. The intruder theory holds that someone entered the Ramsey house on Christmas night. Someone who knew the layout of the home, knew where the children slept, knew enough about the family to reference John Ramsey's bonus amount in the ransom note, and committed the crime before escaping through a basement window that investigators found unlatched. A broken window in the basement had been noted by John Ramsey himself months earlier. He had never had it repaired. Someone with knowledge of that window could have used it to gain access. The contractor whose palm print was found in the basement had worked extensively on the house and knew its layout. He was investigated and was never charged. In 2006, a man named John Mark Carr made international headlines when he confessed to the killing of JonBenét while being held in Thailand on unrelated charges. His confession was detailed and seemingly credible. He was extradited to the United States amid enormous media attention. His DNA did not match the DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. He had not killed her. His confession was false. His reasons for making it were never fully established. The case went cold again. In recent years, advances in DNA technology have renewed hope that the unidentified DNA found on JonBenét's clothing can finally be matched to a suspect. Investigative genetic genealogy, the same technology that identified the Golden State Killer and has solved dozens of other cold cases, has been applied to the JonBenét Ramsey case. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office have confirmed that they are actively pursuing this avenue of investigation. As of today, no arrest has been made. No suspect has been officially named. But the science is closing in on something. The genetic genealogy work that has transformed cold case investigation in the last decade has produced results in cases that seemed far colder than this one. There is genuine reason to believe that the identity of the person who killed JonBenét Ramsey may finally be established within the coming years. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She had a smile that filled every room she walked into, and a spirit that everyone who knew her described as irresistible. She was killed in her own home on Christmas night, a few hours after opening presents under the tree with her family. Her mother spent 10 years fighting to clear her family's name and died without seeing it happen. Her father has spent nearly 30 years living with the loss of his daughter and the weight of a suspicion that should never have been placed on him. And somewhere out there, the person whose DNA was found on JonBenét's clothing has been walking free for nearly 3 decades. That is the part of this case that is impossible to sit with. The evidence exists. The DNA exists. The technology to find this person now exists. JonBenét deserves what every victim on this channel deserves. A name, an answer, justice. Leave your theories in the comments. Do you believe the intruder theory? Do you think the DNA will ever be matched? Do you think we are closer to an answer than we have ever been before? I read every single one, and this case in particular, I want to know what this community thinks. If you are new here, subscribe to the Unsolved Vault and hit the bell. We cover the cases that refuse to be forgotten every Tuesday and Friday